Hi there, and welcome to my video today. I'm going to go through just a basic jelly printing session with you today and kind of just show you my process, how I actually make my own prints, because I use all of these prints that I make for my collage items in my art pieces. The way that I always start is I try to kind of go through my supplies and see what interests me for the day. It changes from day to day. I'm going to use some of these stencils today, and then I picked out a few colors that were interesting to me today. I really love this light olive green lately and the raw umber. So I'm going to do some mixing and see what shows up. And also, I am using a mixing white, which I kind of just discovered. I didn't realize it was out there. It's a great layer to use for the top of a jelly print because then it kind of just blends in with the background and it's a great way to pull all the colors up. So today I'm going to try something new as well and just use this simple, this is just a basic sketch pad. I'd say it's about 96 pounds paper. And I'm going to actually do the prints in this pad because I'm trying to figure out a way to organize my jelly prints because it's getting a little out of control with them. So I'm going to print from the plate right onto the pad. So I've kind of gathered a few things as far as mark making, some stamps, and just ways to kind of create some visual interest. I am going to use two different jelly plates and I'll show you why I'm doing it. I use this kind of as a blender and also to make some imprints with stencils first, and then I kind of transfer them over onto the plate. So I'll show you a little bit more of that as we go along. So the first thing I'm going to do is just figure out what color I want to start with. And I usually try to start with a little bit of a darker color on top because it's going to be the first color that you see on the print. So as you can see, the mixing white, it makes it a little lighter, but not as much as a titanium white would. So I'm going to start with a stencil, just something basic. And I'll start with this one. And what I'm going to do is just get the whole plate covered. And then I'm going to add this color to the stencil and use it as a stamp on the other plate. So I'm just going to use a portion of it. Okay, you can't see it very well, but there is a little layer there of the brown. So I'm going to let that dry for a second, and then I'm going to go in with my next layer. And this over here would make for an interesting print. So I'm just going to pull that with some deli paper. So that's an interesting little pattern. So I'm using the light olive green and I'm going to mix in some of the mixing white. And then I'm just going to put a little color here and there. I'm definitely learning to use a lighter layer on top because I found that as I do more and more jelly printing, if I use heavier paint, heavier layers, you can't see the details of anything underneath in the bottom layers. So I'm just going to add some stamps. And again, I'm going to let this dry for a second because if you don't let the layers dry, then it's going to end up looking like mud. So while this is drying, I'm just going to use this plate to make a few interesting marks, kind of like working on two plates at once. But this is more my kind of practice area. And then I'm going to use this again on the other side and just see what I can pull up. See, there was a lot of paint on that, so it wasn't quite as clear, but that gives me a little place for some more experimenting. So next I'm going to use this medium magenta. And I'm just going to get my brayer wet over here. I find that if I get the color on the brayer first and then blend it in on the other side, it comes out better. So I'm just adding some like really light layers. And again, letting it dry. And while it's drying, I'm going to just do one more stamp. And a lot of times you won't see the actual stamps until you look at the print at the end. And then for the final color, I'm going to use this bright aqua green. Very light coat. And then what I'm going to do is just let this dry. And over here, it's kind of creating an interesting plate of its own. So I'm just going to move this color. And then I'm going to use a different stamp and just create a few interesting marks while it's still wet. So you can do it by either using the stamp to make the actual stamp or using the paint you pick up to create a stamp further along on the plate. So there's a lot of creative ways to use it. Okay, so I've let this dry for a while. I'm going to put some mixing white on it on top. But keep in mind you can also use any kind of medium if you want to use like a matte medium. You can also use that if you don't want to add more color. So I'm just going to use the mixing white and just do a very thin layer on top. Because I don't want to pull any of that color anywhere. Just kind of giving the previous layer something to adhere to. So I'm just going to use my clip. And just give it a minute to absorb into the paper. And while that's drying, I'm going to do the same for this plate over here because this actually turned into an interesting little print of its own. Just gonna kind of get that blob out. Let's see what shows up with this one. So that's a pretty looking print. Now, let's you just do it with this one. Give it a second. So the great part about, I know a lot of people get nervous about not everything coming up, but when this dries and you use it for your next layer of paint for making a print, it's like the nicest, grungiest little piece that can kind of show up on your next print. So there's another one. I actually like that better than the other print. So as you can see, just in 10 minutes, we made some really multi-dimensional jelly prints with some interesting colors and stamps and stencils. And it's not really hard to do. It's just something that you need to play with and practice with, and most of all, have fun with. So I hope this was helpful to you today. Maybe you grabbed a tip or two, and I will put two other videos right here about jelly printing, and I hope to see you again soon.